When you first flip to 2 Samuel chapter 8, it can feel a little dry, kind of like just a list of ancient battles. But if you look just a little closer, you realize it's actually a masterclass in how to build a nation. And it's holding a pretty surprising secret about what real leadership is all about. And that's because this chapter really makes you ask a huge question. What is power actually for? I mean, is it just about winning, expanding your borders, making a big name for yourself? Well, this ancient text has a pretty radical answer to that. And here it is. This is the big reveal. The chapter's final conclusion isn't about all the enemies David defeated or the treasure he captured. It's this one line. He administered justice and equity. Everything else, all the battles, all the strategy, was designed to lead to this single, powerful idea. So to really get what's going on in this chapter, we're going to do something a little weird. We're going to start at the end. We're starting with the punchline because this one mission statement completely reframes everything that comes before it. Okay, to really grasp this goal, we have to look at the original Hebrew. The first key word here is mishpat. Now, this isn't just about what happens in a courtroom with a judge. It's much bigger. It's about creating an entire social order, a whole structure for society that is fundamentally fair and right. And it's paired with this word, tzedakah. This means righteousness. It's all about putting society into a right relationship with each other and with God. When you put mishpat and tzedakah together, well, that was the gold standard for being an ideal king. This was the ultimate point of all that power. All right, so if the goal is this perfectly just society, then why all the battles? What's with all the fighting? Well, the text doesn't present these as random acts of aggression. It frames them as the really difficult, messy, but necessary work of creating a secure nation where justice could actually survive and grow. And this wasn't just chaotic warfare, it was totally strategic. You can see David systematically securing his borders on every side. He moves west to deal with the Philistines, then east against Moab, then north to take on the Arameans, and finally south to secure Edom. He's literally building a safe, stable kingdom for his people. Now, we can't just gloss over the brutality here. The text describes David measuring with a line to execute a portion of the Moabite army. In the world of ancient warfare, this was a symbol of absolute, total sovereign judgment. It's a really stark reminder that creating that stability, it came at an incredibly high and violent price. But then, after listing all these victories, the narrator does something really interesting. He pivots. The focus shifts from what David did to why he was able to do it. And this is where the chapter's central theological message just snaps into focus. This is it. This is the key that unlocks the whole chapter. It's tucked away there in verse 6, and the author just states it plainly. It wasn't just David's brilliant strategy. It wasn't just his army's strength. The text says God was the one giving him the victory. And you can see David acting this out. He doesn't just take all the spoils of war and dump them into his own personal treasury. No way. The gold, the silver, the bronze, it all gets dedicated to God. It's a physical act that says, this victory and all the credit belongs to a higher power. He's not trying to make a name for himself here. And just in case we somehow missed it, the author repeats the exact same phrase again in verse 14. This isn't an accident. This repetition, this bookending, is completely deliberate. It forces us, the reader, to see every single conquest through a theological lens. The main character here, ultimately, isn't David. It's God. All right, now for the really fun part. Ancient texts like this are almost never simple. And 2 Samuel 8 has some fascinating little puzzles that scholars still love to debate. Let's dig into a few places where the manuscripts themselves tell a story. Okay, first up, who did David's army actually fight in the Valley of Salt? Some of the old Hebrew manuscripts say Aram, but others say Edom. But if you look at the parallel story in 1 Chronicles and, the actual geography of the valley, it pretty strongly suggests that Edom is the right answer. It's a really cool window into how scholars do this kind of textual detective work. Or how about this one? How many horsemen were captured? 2 Samuel says 700, but 1 Chronicles says 7,000. So which is it? Well, this kind of difference is most likely just a simple scribal error, someone messing up when they copy the numbers by hand. The main point in both books is still crystal clear. David captured a huge enemy force. And finally, this is a really fascinating translation puzzle. The Hebrew text literally calls David's sons priests. The word is kohanim. Now, since the official priesthood was restricted to the tribe of Levi, this created a bit of a theological problem for later readers. But the word can also mean a high-ranking official, and that's why most of our modern Bibles translate it as chief officials. It just goes to show you that translation is always an act of interpretation. So after all that, why should we spend time on a 3,000-year-old battle report? Well, because its core message, that power is for justice and that true success comes from a higher source, has been echoing through thousands of years of history. This table gives us a quick snapshot. You've got early church fathers like Augustine focusing on just rule, not personal glory. The Reformed traditions really zoned in on God's total sovereignty in those repeated verses. And Catholic interpreters have often seen David as a symbolic forerunner, a type of Christ, who would one day come to defeat all evil. And remember, in its original context, this chapter is the direct follow-up to the one right before it, 2 Samuel 7. That's where God makes this huge promise to establish David's kingdom forever. So this chapter, this is the how. This is the moment where that divine promise starts becoming a real physical, political reality on the ground. And that leads right into that idea of David being a type. See, he establishes a kingdom of justice and righteousness, but it's imperfect. It's messy. So later traditions looked back at this and saw it as a foreshadowing, a pattern pointing forward to a future ideal king who would bring a perfect and final reign of justice and peace. So we end right where we started. This ancient blueprint for power leaves us with a pretty challenging question for our own lives. In our work, in our families, in any leadership role we have, where are we tempted to make a name for ourselves, to take all the credit for the victory, instead of dedicating the outcome to the higher purpose of serving others with justice and righteousness?